My name is Ruth, 62 years old, and 6 months ago, I lost Frank, my husband of 40 years, to a sudden heart attack. We never had much, but our love made up for everything we lacked. The worst part of grief is not just missing the person, but dealing with those who never really understood what you had. Last week, my son Michael called to tell me he had sold Frank's Toyota without my permission, saying, "Now you will have to take the bus to work every day." What he never realized was what his father had hidden in the secret compartment of that glove box years ago. If you want to hear how a grieving widow found her voice and discovered her husband's final gift, subscribe now and let me know where you are watching from. This story is about betrayal, hidden treasures, and finding strength when you least expect it. Frank and I built our life together brick by brick with modest means but extraordinary love. I have been working as a receptionist at Columbus Regional Hospital for over 30 years now. The irony does not escape me that I spend my days directing people through the same building where Frank took his last breath. We met when I was 22, and he came to the emergency room with a sprained wrist from a faculty basketball game. He was a high school history teacher with a passion for making the past come alive for reluctant teenagers. While the doctor wrapped his wrist, he asked me about the book I was reading during my break, and somehow we were still talking when my shift ended 3 hours later. Our courtship was simple but meaningful. Frank would pick me up in his already aging Toyota, and we would drive to Schiller Park with homemade sandwiches and thermoses of coffee. He proposed there 6 months later, not with an expensive diamond, but with his grandmother's simple band and a promise that I would never face life's challenges alone. We bought a small ranch house in a working-class neighborhood of Columbus, with just enough yard for Frank to grow tomatoes and for me to plant the roses I loved. The early years were lean but happy. Frank's teaching salary combined with my hospital wages kept us afloat, but just barely. We saved every penny possible for going vacations and restaurants to build a modest nest egg. Our greatest struggle was having a child. For nearly 12 years, we tried to start a family, suffering through 2 miscarriages that tested our faith and resolve. When I finally became pregnant with Michael at 35, the doctors called it a miracle, but Frank just smiled and said he had never doubted. Frank was a devoted father from the moment Michael was born. He coached Little League, despite knowing very little about baseball, helped with science fair projects, and spent hours discussing history with our curious son. No matter how tired he was after a day of wrangling teenagers, he always had energy for Michael. He would often say, "Teaching other people's kids pays the bills, but teaching our son builds the future." Through it all, the Toyota remained our faithful companion. Frank bought it used when we first married, and he maintained it with religious dedication. Every Saturday morning, he would be out in the driveway, checking fluids, changing oil, and keeping it in perfect running condition. When friends or colleagues teased him about driving such an old car, he would pat the hood affectionately and say, "This machine has taken us to every important moment of our lives. It brought us home from the hospital with Michael. It has character." As Michael grew, we made sacrifices to ensure he would have opportunities we never did. We started a college fund when he was just 2 years old, contributing whatever we could spare each month. Frank took on summer school teaching and weekend tutoring jobs while I picked up extra shifts during holidays. We wore outdated clothes, kept our thermostat low in winter and high in summer, and learned to repair rather than replace. Frank's Toyota received more attention than our own comforts, but only because it was essential to our livelihoods. Every other Friday night, Frank and I would drive out to Alum Creek Lake, our special place. We would park overlooking the water and talk about everything and nothing, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence with hands intertwined on the worn center console. Those moments in the Toyota, watching the sunset reflect off the water, were when I felt richest despite our modest bank account. When Michael was accepted to Dartmouth on a partial scholarship, we were bursting with pride. Though it meant emptying most of our savings and taking on a second mortgage, we never hesitated. Frank simply said, "Education is the one thing nobody can ever take away from him." We drove that Toyota all the way to New Hampshire for freshman drop-off, the 3 of us squeezed in with Michael's belongings, singing along to Frank's jazz cassettes. I remember Frank patting the dashboard as we pulled away from the campus, leaving our only child behind, saying, "Good job, old girl. One more milestone delivered." The college years brought changes we had not anticipated. Frank's health began to decline in his late 50s with high blood pressure and early signs of heart disease requiring more frequent doctor visits. He stubbornly refused to retire early, insisting on teaching until he physically could not stand in front of a classroom anymore. "Those kids still need me," he would say when I expressed concern about his increasing fatigue. I continued working at the hospital, our roles gradually shifting as I became more of a caregiver to Frank. The Toyota became even more important then, as I used it to drive Frank to doctor appointments and pharmacy runs. When he finally retired at 61, it was the Toyota that took him to his retirement party decorated by his students with streamers and good wishes written in shoe polish on the windows. Frank's final 2 years were spent at home managing his health and finding joy in small pleasures. He began writing in a journal, something he had never done before. When I asked about it, he just smiled and said, "Just leaving some thoughts behind in case my ticker gives out before my brain." I did not push him on it, respecting his privacy, as he had always respected mine. On the day Frank died, I had taken the Toyota to work as usual. He had seemed fine that morning, kissing me goodbye and reminding me to pick up his heart medication on the way home. The call came just after lunch. Frank's voice strained as he told me he was not feeling well. By the time I raced home, he was unconscious. The paramedics arrived minutes after I did, but it was too late. A massive heart attack, they said. Quick and likely painless, as if that somehow made it better. I drove the Toyota to the funeral home alone. Frank's presence still palpable in the passenger seat where he had sat just days before. The preset radio stations were all his favorites. The seat was still adjusted to his height. The pine-scented air freshener he insisted on hanging from the rearview mirror still swung gently with each turn. It was almost unbearable. Yet I could not imagine driving any other car. Michael had been such a sweet, thoughtful child. I still remember him at 7 saving his allowance for weeks to buy Frank a tie for Father's Day. He would help me in the garden without being asked, curious about each plant and eager to see things grow. He was the kind of boy who would notice if I seemed tired and offer to make me tea, or who would sit with Frank going through old history books simply because he knew it made his father happy. When did that considerate child transform into the man who would sell his mother's car without permission? The change began gradually during his college years at Dartmouth. Each time he came home for holidays, he seemed to bring less of himself back with him. His freshman year, he still hugged us tightly and shared stories of his classes with enthusiasm. By sophomore year, he was spending most of his visits texting friends or complaining about the slow internet in our home. He began making comments about our clothes, our furniture, our Toyota, all with a hint of embarrassment that cut deeper than outright criticism. It was during his senior year that Michael met Stephanie Bellingham, the daughter of a banking executive from Connecticut. She came home with him for Thanksgiving dressed in clothes that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. I tried to welcome her cooking all of Michael's favorite dishes and using my mother's china saved for special occasions. Stephanie picked at the food, asking if the turkey was free range and if I had any gluten-free options. When Frank proudly offered to show her around Columbus in our Toyota, she exchanged a look with Michael that spoke volumes. They suddenly had other plans, renting a luxury car instead. After graduation, Michael took a job at a financial firm in Stephanie's father's network. They married in a lavish ceremony at her parents' country club that made me feel like an underdressed outsider rather than the mother of the groom. Frank and I contributed what we could, draining the last of our modest savings to help with the rehearsal dinner, but it was clear our efforts were considered quaint at best. During his toast, Michael thanked Stephanie's parents for showing him what success really looks like, while Frank and I exchanged pained glances from our table far from the head table. As the years passed, Michael and Stephanie settled in Worthington Hills, an affluent Columbus suburb nearly an hour from our home. They had 2 children, Emma and Jacob, who we adored but rarely saw. Visits became annual events scheduled with the formality of business meetings. When we did see the grandchildren, they were often distracted by expensive tablets or being rushed to various enrichment activities. Frank would try to engage them with the same history stories that had once captivated Michael, but their glazed expressions made it clear they had been taught that such simple entertainments were beneath them. Michael's criticism of our lifestyle became more overt. "Mom, when are you going to update this kitchen? It looks like the 1980s in here." Or, "Dad, you really need to consider a retirement community with activities. Sitting around this old house cannot be good for your health." Each suggestion came with the clear implication that our choices were somehow deficient, our contentment with simple things, a failure of ambition rather than a conscious value. The Toyota became a particular point of contention. When Michael would visit, he would park his luxury SUV at the far end of our driveway, as if afraid our old car might somehow contaminate it. During our last Thanksgiving together before Frank died, Michael made a comment that still stings when I think of it. As Frank was gathering coats for everyone to leave, Michael gestured toward the Toyota visible through the window and said, "Dad, at some point you have to admit defeat and get a car made in this century. It is practically an antique." Frank, normally so gentle, straightened his shoulders and looked our son directly in the eyes. "That Toyota has more character and reliability than most people I know. It has never let us down, never needed more than we could give it, and has been part of every important moment in our family's history. I would rather drive it than any overpriced status symbol on the market." The room fell silent, Michael's face flushing with what might have been shame, though it passed quickly. It was one of the few times I ever saw Frank directly challenge our son's new values. When Frank's health began to deteriorate, Michael's involvement was minimal and always on his terms. He would call rather than visit, send food delivery gift cards rather than bring a meal text, rather than hold his father's hand. During Frank's final weeks, Michael visited exactly twice each time, glancing at his watch throughout the visit and finding reasons why he could not stay longer. "The kids have activities," or "Stephanie has planned a dinner with clients," always took precedence over his dying father. The funeral was a study in contrasts. While our modest community of friends, neighbors, and Frank's former students packed the small chapel in genuine grief, Michael and Stephanie arrived 10 minutes late in coordinated designer morning attire that set them apart from everyone else. Michael's eulogy focused more on his own accomplishments, which he framed as tributes to his father's influence, than on Frank himself. As people shared memories at the reception afterward, I overheard Michael networking with one of Frank's former colleagues who now worked at a private school, discussing potential connections for his children's education. Most painful was the moment I overheard him speaking to one of his business associates who had attended out of respect. "Now I can finally convince Mom to join the 21st century," Michael said, not realizing I was just around the corner. "The house, that ancient car, all of it needs to go. She will be better off in a managed community where people can keep an eye on her." I stood frozen, a plate of untouched food in my hands, as the full realization washed over me. In Michael's eyes, I had become an obligation to manage, not a person with agency and desires of my own. The sweet boy who had once loved helping me garden and listening to Frank's stories had been replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who saw his parents as embarrassing relics rather than the loving people who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. As the last mourners left the reception, Michael approached me with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Mom, I will handle everything from here," he said, patting my hand condescendingly. "You just focus on taking care of yourself." In that moment, I realized that my grief for Frank was now compounded by the grief of losing the son I thought I knew. The first weeks after Frank's funeral passed in a fog of grief and adjustment. After 40 years of marriage, I had forgotten how to be just one person. The silence in our small house was oppressive. I would catch myself calling out to Frank when I came home from work, or setting two places at the dinner table before remembering. At night, I slept with one of his old sweaters, the faint scent of his aftershave my only comfort against the emptiness beside me. Each morning, I would make coffee for two out of habit, then sit at our kitchen table staring at his empty chair. The routine of decades is not easily broken, even when its purpose is gone. At work, I functioned on autopilot, checking in patients with a professional smile that never reached my eyes. My coworkers were kind, offering casseroles and companionship, but they had their own families to return to at day's end. The long evenings stretched before me like an empty road. The financial realities of widowhood added practical stress to my emotional burden. Frank's pension was reduced significantly with his passing, and while we had saved modestly over the years, much of our nest egg had gone toward Michael's education and helping with medical bills not covered by insurance. The mortgage was paid off, thankfully, but property taxes, utilities, and daily expenses remained. I calculated and recalculated my budget at the kitchen table, trying to make the numbers work without dipping into what little savings remained. Through it all, the Toyota became my unexpected solace. Each morning, I would go out to the driveway and pat its hood just as Frank had done for decades. "Good morning, old girl," I would say, echoing his words. Another day for us to get through together. Driving to work, I would keep the radio on his favorite jazz station, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling at memories the music evoked. The car was full of him, from the worn spot on the driver's seat from his wallet to the precise way the mirrors were adjusted for his height. 3 weeks after the funeral, while cleaning Frank's desk to organize his papers, I discovered a small leather journal tucked in the back of a drawer. I had seen him writing in it during his last year, but had respected his privacy. Now, alone with his memory, I carefully opened it, feeling both intrusive and desperate to hear his voice again in some form. The journal was not a daily accounting, but rather a collection of thoughts, memories, and wishes. Frank had titled it simply, "For Ruth, When I Am Gone." The first entry made me both laugh and cry. If you are reading this, I guess my ticker finally gave out. Do not be too sad. I got to love you for a lifetime, which is more than most men deserve. Page after page contained his reflections on our life together and his hopes for my future without him. Remember our first apartment, that awful green carpet and the leaky faucet we could never fix? You made it beautiful anyway with those curtains you sewed from fabric remnants. You have always made beauty from whatever life gave you. Do not stop now that I am gone. One passage in particular gave me both comfort and direction. Ruth, when you read this, I want you to promise me something. Do not just exist after I am gone. Live fully, completely. We always talked about seeing the Grand Canyon someday, about you taking those photography classes at the community college. Do those things, all of them. I will be watching and cheering you on from wherever I am. It was as if Frank was speaking directly to me, giving me permission to find purpose beyond grief. That night I slept better than I had since his passing, the journal tucked under my pillow like a talisman against loneliness. With Frank's encouragement from beyond guiding me, I began taking small steps toward this new, unwanted chapter of life. I called his friend Robert, who owned an auto repair shop, and asked him to teach me basic car maintenance. Frank had always handled that, and the Toyota deserved the same care he had given it. Robert was surprised but pleased, spending a Saturday morning showing me how to check the oil change a tire and recognize warning signs that needed professional attention. "Frank would be proud of you, Ruth," Robert said as we closed the hood. "He always said you were stronger than you knew." I began a new Friday ritual, driving the Toyota out to Alum Creek Lake, where Frank and I had spent so many evenings. I would park in our usual spot overlooking the water, sometimes bringing a simple picnic dinner. There, in the quiet privacy of the car that had witnessed so much of our history, I would talk to Frank, telling him about my week, my struggles, my small victories. Sometimes I swear I could feel him sitting beside me, his presence a comfort rather than a haunting. It was during one of these Friday pilgrimages that I first noticed the special compartment in the glove box. I had opened it to retrieve a tissue and noticed how the back panel seemed slightly askew. When I pressed it experimentally, a small secondary compartment popped open behind the owner's manual storage area. Inside was a sealed envelope with Frank's handwriting, "For Ruth. Only open this if something happens to me or the car." My hands trembled as I held it, torn between curiosity and a strange reluctance to break yet another connection to Frank. After some consideration, I decided to respect his instructions. Nothing had happened to me or the car, and there was something comforting about having this last unopened message from him, a conversation yet to have when the time was right. I carefully replaced the envelope and closed the hidden compartment, somehow feeling that Frank had just given me another gift, a mystery to sustain me. As weeks turned to months, the medical bills from Frank's final illness began arriving despite our insurance. Each statement brought fresh stress and a reminder of those painful final days. I set up payment plans where possible and cut expenses to the bone. I brought lunch from home, turned the thermostat down further, and canceled subscriptions to everything but the most basic utilities. The Toyota, economical and reliable, became even more precious as my financial constraints tightened. Michael called occasionally, his conversations brief and focused on what he termed fixing your situation. Each call featured suggestions that felt more like demands, none of which acknowledged my desires or autonomy. "Mom, you should really sell that house. It is too big for you now, and the maintenance will be overwhelming. Have you looked into those retirement communities I sent you links to? There is one with an opening just 20 minutes from us. You should consider getting rid of Dad's things soon. It is not healthy to keep living in a shrine." Each conversation left me feeling diminished and misunderstood. I began to dread his calls, even as I longed for the connection to my only child. The son who called bore so little resemblance to the boy I had raised that it was like speaking to a stranger who happened to know intimate details of my life. I am not ready to make those changes yet, Michael. I would respond trying to maintain both boundaries and connection. I need time to figure out what I want for this next chapter. Mom, at your age, you cannot afford to waste time? He would counter, the condescension in his tone unmistakable. Let me handle things. You are too emotional right now to make good decisions. After these calls, I would often drive the Toyota to the lake seeking Frank's wisdom in the quiet sanctuary of our car. He has become someone I do not recognize. I would confide to the empty passenger seat. Where did we go wrong? The silence offered no answers, but the familiar surroundings of the car Frank had loved gave me strength to trust my own instincts rather than surrender to Michael's vision of what my life should be. I was gradually finding a rhythm to widowhood, maintaining my independence while honoring Frank's memory when the event occurred that would force me to confront both my son and my future in ways I never anticipated. That Tuesday began like any other workday. I left the hospital at 5:30, stopping briefly at the grocery store to pick up essentials. When I turned onto our street at just past 6, something felt immediately wrong. The driveway was empty. The Toyota, which should have been waiting faithfully where I had parked it that morning, was gone. My heart raced as I hurried inside to call the police, assuming the car had been stolen. Who would take a 15-year-old Toyota with over 200,000 miles on it? As I fumbled for the phone, it rang in my hand, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. The caller ID showed Michael's number. "Michael, I cannot talk right now," I said hurriedly. "Someone stole the Toyota. I need to call the police." There was a pause before Michael responded, his tone casual and slightly amused. "Oh, Mom, no one stole it. I sold your car today. Got a decent price considering how old it was." The words hit me like a physical blow, forcing me to grip the counter for support. "You what?" I managed to whisper. "I sold it. That thing was ancient and unsafe. You should not be driving something that old at your age anyway. The bus goes right by the hospital, so you will be fine." "Michael," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady as shock gave way to anger. "That was not your car to sell. It belonged to your father and me. How could you possibly think you had the right to do this?" His sigh was audible, the put-upon sound of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. "Mom, be practical. Dad is gone. That car was an embarrassment and a safety hazard. I did you a favor. The guy who bought it gave me $4,000, which is honestly more than it was worth. I will bring you some of the money this weekend." "Some of the money?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Michael, you sold my property without permission. That is theft. I want all of the money and the name of the person who bought it." "Do not be dramatic, Mom," he said dismissively. "I am your son. I am looking out for your best interests since you are not thinking clearly. The money will help with your expenses, and I will put some aside to help with a down payment when you are ready to move to a retirement community." As Michael continued outlining his plans for my life and my money, a sudden cold realization washed over me. Frank's letter, the sealed envelope in the hidden compartment of the glove box. A wave of panic replaced my anger. "Michael, what about the things in the car?" I interrupted urgently. "The glove box contents, did you check everything before you sold it?" "I cleaned all that junk out," he replied casually. "Just old maps and receipts. There was nothing important." My heart sank. "There was something important," I said quietly. "Something your father left for me that you had no right to dispose of." "Well, if it was so important, why was it just sitting in an old car?" He countered, his tone becoming defensive. "Look, what is done is done. I will bring the paperwork and some money on Saturday. We can talk about next steps then." "I want the buyer's information," I insisted, tears now streaming down my face. "Right now, Michael." "That is not necessary," he said firmly. "It is already done, Mom. Time to move forward. I need to go now. Stephanie has dinner ready and the kids have homework. I will see you Saturday around noon." Before I could protest further, he had hung up. I stood in my silent kitchen phone, still in hand, shock and grief washing over me in equal measure. The Toyota had been my last physical connection to Frank, the space where I still felt his presence most strongly. And somewhere in that car was the last message he had intended for me, now in the hands of a stranger. That night was one of the longest of my life. I moved through the empty house like a ghost, touching Frank's things, desperately trying to maintain my connection to him, as another piece of him had been stripped away. I pulled out his journal again, reading his words through tears, searching for guidance. "You are stronger than you know, Ruth," he had written. "You always have been. I was just lucky enough to witness it." By morning, exhaustion had given way to resolve. I called in sick to work for the first time in years, then contacted a family attorney Frank and I had consulted when preparing our wills. She confirmed what I already suspected: the car had been jointly owned, and Michael had no legal right to sell it without my consent. The sale was fraudulent, and I had grounds to both recover the vehicle and press charges if I chose to. "Do you want to pursue legal action against your son?" the lawyer asked gently. The question gave me pause. Despite everything, Michael was still my child, the baby Frank and I had longed for through years of disappointment. "Not yet," I finally answered. "First, I want to try to make him understand what he has done, and I need to find that car." With a plan forming, I went to the hall closet and pulled out my rarely used purse. Inside was the bus schedule a kind coworker had given me months ago when my car had been in for repairs. It was time to pay my son an unexpected visit. The bus ride to Worthington Hills was an education in itself. I had rarely used public transportation, and navigating the transfers and unfamiliar routes, while distressed, added another layer of anxiety to an already difficult mission. The 90-minute journey gave me plenty of time to rehearse what I would say to Michael, alternating between righteous anger and heartbroken disappointment. When I finally walked up the curved driveway to their imposing colonial-style house, I felt acutely out of place. My simple cardigan and slacks, practical for hospital work, contrasted sharply with the manicured perfection of their neighborhood. Taking a deep breath, I rang the doorbell, hearing the elaborate chime echo through what I knew was their 2-story foyer with its crystal chandelier. Stephanie opened the door, her surprise quickly morphing into discomfort. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, her casual weekend wear likely costing more than my entire wardrobe. "Ruth," she said, using my first name despite my repeated requests over the years to be called Mom. "We were not expecting you until noon. Michael is still out for his morning run." "I need to speak with him urgently," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "May I come in and wait?" She hesitated visibly before her country club manners won out over her obvious reluctance. "Of course. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh press of single-origin Ethiopian." I followed her into their immaculate kitchen, accepting the coffee more to have something to do with my hands than from any desire to drink it. The cup was delicate porcelain, making me hyper-aware of my every movement for fear of breaking something valuable. "Michael mentioned you were coming by to discuss some financial matters," Stephanie said, perching on a bar stool across the marble island from me. "He is really just trying to help you know. We worry about you all alone in that old house." Before I could formulate a response that would not betray my simmering anger, the back door opened and Michael entered, flushed from his run and expensive athletic wear. He stopped short at the sight of me sitting in his kitchen. "Mom, what are you doing here so early? I told you I would come by at noon." "I took the bus," I said pointedly, "since I no longer have a car." The barb landed as intended, Michael's expression flickering between annoyance and guilt before settling on patronizing concern. "You see, this is exactly why I am worried about you. Taking the bus all this way when we had already arranged a time. It is not safe." "Selling my car without permission was not safe for you," I countered, setting down the coffee cup carefully. "I have spoken with our attorney. What you did was illegal, Michael." Stephanie made a small distressed sound and quickly excused herself, murmuring something about checking on the children. Michael watched her go before turning back to me with a hardened expression. "Let us go to my office," he said tersely. "This is not a conversation for the kitchen." I followed him to an expensively furnished home office, noting the framed degrees and professional awards prominently displayed, but no family photos anywhere to be seen. He closed the door and turned to me, arms crossed defensively. "I was going to handle everything properly today," he began, his tone making it clear he thought I was overreacting. "Bringing you the paperwork discussing next steps. There was no need for this dramatic visit." "Dramatic," I echoed, my carefully rehearsed speech forgotten in the face of his dismissive attitude. "You stole and sold your father's car, Michael. The car he loved, the car that has been part of our family longer than your children have been alive." "It was just an old car, Mom," he shot back. Ancient, unsafe, and frankly embarrassing. I did you a favor. You could not even get a reasonable trade in value for something that old, but I found a private buyer who appreciated vintage Toyotas. It was not yours to sell, I said, my voice quivering despite my efforts to remain calm. How did you even get it? We did not give you keys. Michael had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I had a copy of your house key made last year in case of emergency. The spare car key was in the kitchen drawer where it always is. The violation of this admission stunned me momentarily. He had been planning this entering our home without permission, all while pretending his visits were out of familial concern. There was something important in that car, I said when I could trust my voice again. Something your father left for me in a special compartment in the glove box. For the first time, Michael looked genuinely surprised. What are you talking about? I checked the glove box thoroughly. There was nothing but the manual, some napkins, and old gas receipts. There was a hidden compartment, I explained, behind the main section. Your father left a letter there for me, something I was only supposed to open if something happened to him or the car. My voice broke on the last words, the loss of this final connection to Frank hitting me anew. Michael's expression shifted from surprise to skepticism. Mom, I think you might be confused. There was no hidden compartment or secret letter. Dad was not the type for melodramatic gestures like that. His dismissal of both my words and Frank's character ignited a fresh wave of anger. You did not know your father as well as you think, I said coldly. Just like you clearly do not know me if you thought I would thank you for stealing my car. His face flushed at my tone, so unlike my usual accommodating demeanor. I am trying to help you, he insisted. You cannot keep living in the past. Dad is gone. That house is too big for you. That car was too old. You need to move forward. Moving forward does not mean erasing Frank from my life, I countered. And it certainly does not mean surrendering my independence to your idea of what my life should be. Our argument escalated, Michael's veneer of helpful concern cracking to reveal the condescension beneath. When I remained firm in my demand for the buyer's information, he finally tried a different approach, reaching for his checkbook. Look, if this is about the money, I can write you a check right now, he offered, pen poised. $5,000, even more than I got for it. Then we can put this behind us and focus on more important matters like getting you into a proper living situation. I stared at him, wondering how this stranger had emerged from the sweet boy Frank and I had raised. This is not about money, I said quietly but firmly. This is about respect and memories. That car was my connection to your father. The letter he left was meant for me, not for you to discard without a thought. Michael opened his mouth to respond when the office door creaked open, revealing Emma and Jacob, my grandchildren, peering in curiously. At 7 and 9, they were beautiful children who barely knew me, our interaction limited to obligatory holiday gatherings and the occasional supervised visit. Grandma? Emma said hesitantly, her eyes wide. We heard voices. Before Michael could intervene, I smiled at them, genuinely happy despite the circumstances. Yes, sweetheart. I came to talk to your daddy about something important. Jacob stepped forward, interest piqued. Did you really take the bus all the way here by yourself? Dad says buses are dangerous. The bus was perfectly fine, I assured him, and the nice driver helped me find the right stop. Michael stood abruptly. Kids, Grandma and I are having an adult conversation. Why do not you go help Mom get ready? We have to leave for the club soon. The disappointment on their faces was evident, and I realized with a pang how little they knew of me, how their father had effectively created a barrier between us, just as he had between Frank and them. Maybe next time I visit we could spend some time together, I suggested. I could teach you to make the chocolate chip cookies your daddy loved when he was your age. Their excited responses were cut short by Michael's firm, "We will see. Now go find Mom, please." As they reluctantly left, he closed the door behind them with barely contained impatience. Do not make promises to them you cannot keep, he said tersely. We have a very full schedule of activities and lessons. They are my grandchildren, Michael, I replied. I would like to know them better than just seeing them at Christmas and Easter. He sighed heavily. Mom, I have tried to be patient, but you are being unreasonable. I sold an unsafe, ancient car that you have no business driving at your age. I am offering you more money than it was worth. Yet you are threatening legal action and trying to manipulate the children into this situation. The unfairness of his characterization left me momentarily speechless. When I found my voice, it was steadier than I had expected. "I am leaving now," I said, standing and gathering my purse. "But this is not over. I want the buyer's contact information by the end of today, or I will be pursuing legal remedies, including filing a police report for theft. And Michael," I added, looking directly into the eyes that were so like Frank's, yet lacking his compassion, "I raised you better than this." I walked out with as much dignity as I could muster, pausing briefly to say goodbye to my grandchildren and a visibly uncomfortable Stephanie. As I stepped outside, Michael followed me to the door. "This is ridiculous, Mom. What are you going to do? Take the bus all the way home now? Let me at least drive you." "No, thank you," I replied. "I prefer the bus to accepting help with strings attached." As I walked down their perfect driveway toward the bus stop, I heard him call after me. "Fine. I will text you the buyer's information tonight, but you are making a big mistake not letting me handle this." The long bus ride home gave me time to process the confrontation. Beneath my anger and hurt was a profound sadness for what had been lost, not just Frank and the Toyota, but the relationship with my son I had once treasured. Yet alongside that grief was a surprising sense of strength. I had stood my ground, advocated for myself, and refused to be dismissed. Frank would have been proud. True to his word, if only to avoid legal consequences, Michael texted me that evening with a name and phone number. "Tom Peterson. Lives in Westerville. Car already sold. Can we move on now?" The dismissive tone came through even in the brief message, but I had what I needed. With hands trembling slightly from both nervousness and anticipation, I dialed the number, praying that Michael was wrong about the car already being resold. My heart pounded as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Just as I was preparing for voicemail, a friendly male voice answered. "Hello, Mr. Peterson?" I asked, my voice wavering slightly. "My name is Ruth Williams. I believe you recently purchased a Toyota from my son Michael." There was a pause, then a cautious, "Yes, that is right. Is there a problem?" Taking a deep breath, I explained the situation as calmly as I could, how the car had belonged to my late husband and me, how Michael had sold it without permission, and most importantly about the letter Frank had left in the hidden compartment of the glove box. As I spoke, Tom Peterson's tone shifted from wariness to concern. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Mrs. Williams, I had no idea. Your son represented himself as the legal owner. If I had known this was unauthorized, I never would have bought the car." "Please," I said, trying to keep the desperation from my voice, "I am not blaming you at all. I just need to know if you still have the car, or if you have resold it already." "I still have it," he replied to my immense relief. "I actually bought it because I appreciate older, well-maintained Toyotas. I was going to restore it as a project. Your son mentioned it had belonged to his father, but said you had no interest in keeping it." The deliberate lie stung, but I pushed past it. "Would it be possible for me to see the car? To look for my husband's letter? I would be happy to take the bus to wherever is convenient for you." "No need for that, Mrs. Williams," Tom said firmly. "This is clearly important. Why do not I bring the car to you tomorrow morning? Say around 9. I would like to hear more about this situation anyway before deciding how to proceed." His kindness brought tears to my eyes. "That would be wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Peterson." "Please call me Tom," he replied warmly. "And I am sorry for your loss, both of your husband and the car that clearly means so much to you." After providing my address, I hung up and spent a restless night alternating between hope that Frank's letter would still be there and anxiety that it might have been discarded or lost during the sale. By 7 the next morning, I was already sitting at the kitchen window watching the street for any sign of the familiar Toyota. At precisely 9, the distinctive hum of that engine I knew so well brought me to my feet. Through the window, I could see the Toyota pulling into our driveway, looking exactly as it had the last time I had parked it there. I hurried outside, not even bothering with a jacket despite the morning chill. Tom Peterson proved to be a kind-faced man in his early 60s with salt and pepper hair and the calloused hands of someone who worked with tools. He stepped out of the car with a warm smile and extended his hand. "Mrs. Williams, I am Tom. It is a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." I shook his hand, emotion making speech difficult for a moment. "Thank you for coming, and please call me Ruth. I started working on some restoration already," Tom explained, gesturing to the Toyota. "Gave her a good wash and wax touched up some of the paint. Your husband kept this car in remarkable condition for its age. He loved this car, I said, simply running my hand along the familiar hood. It was part of our family. Tom nodded understandingly. My dad was the same way about his old Ford. After he passed, I kept it running for years just to feel close to him. He unlocked the passenger door for me. I noticed the fishing hat in the back window and left it there. Seemed like it belonged. Sure enough, Frank's faded blue fishing hat still lay on the rear shelf where he had placed it years ago after a rare day off at the lake. The sight of it brought fresh tears to my eyes. Thank you for not removing it. I managed. It was his favorite. Tom watched thoughtfully as I settled into the passenger seat, my hands automatically finding their familiar resting places. My wife packed up all the papers and things that were in the car, he said. She is very organized that way. Let me get the box for you. From the trunk, he retrieved a plastic container neatly labeled Toyota Contents in feminine handwriting. He placed it on my lap before walking around to the driver's side and getting in beside me. Everything we found is in there, he explained. Maps, maintenance records, a few CDs, the owner's manual, some receipts. With trembling fingers, I opened the box and began sorting through the contents. Everything was meticulously organized, but as I reached the bottom of the container, my heart sank. Frank's letter was not there. It is not here, I whispered, disappointment washing over me. The letter from Frank. Tom looked genuinely concerned. You mentioned it was in a hidden compartment in the glove box. May I ask where exactly? Maybe we missed it. I do not know precisely, I admitted. I only discovered it by accident. The back panel seemed loose, and when I pressed it, a small section opened up behind the owner's manual area. Tom's face brightened. A secret compartment. Many older Toyotas have those, but most owners never discover them. The dealership told me about it when I bought my first one years ago. He leaned forward and opened the glove box. Would it be all right if I looked? At my nod, he expertly pressed 2 points simultaneously on the back panel of the glove box. With a soft click, a narrow compartment opened, revealing a sealed envelope that had been tucked securely inside. Is this it? Tom asked, carefully removing the envelope without opening it. The sight of Frank's neat handwriting on the front, "For Ruth, only open if something happens to me or the car," brought a flood of emotions so intense I could barely breathe. Yes, I managed. Yes, that is it. Tom handed me the envelope with a respect that acknowledged its importance. I think you should open it now, he said gently. Both conditions have been met after all. As I held the sealed envelope in my hands, a strange mixture of grief and anticipation washed over me. This was Frank's final message, his last words I had yet to discover. With careful fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded several pages of Frank's distinctive handwriting. My dearest Ruth, the letter began, and I could almost hear his voice reading the words. If you are reading this, either I am gone or something has happened to our trusty Toyota. Either way, I wanted to make sure you know about something I have been doing for years. Tom, sensing the privacy of the moment, quietly suggested, "Why do not I give you some time alone? I will just stretch my legs in the yard." I nodded gratefully, waiting until he had stepped out of the car before continuing to read. From the day we brought Michael home from the hospital, Frank had written, I started setting aside a little money each month in a separate account. Not much, just $20 here, $50 there, whatever we could spare without you noticing in our budget. I called it my Ruth Second Chapter Fund. My breath caught as I read further. Frank explained that he had continued this secret saving for decades, building a nest egg specifically designed for me to use after he was gone. He had invested conservatively, allowing the account to grow slowly but steadily. I know we always talked about traveling someday, about you taking those photography classes, about seeing the Grand Canyon at sunrise. I may not be there to share those moments with you, but I wanted to make sure you had the means to live those dreams for both of us. The letter continued with account information passwords and instructions on accessing the funds he had accumulated. When I reached the final paragraph, tears flowed freely down my cheeks. There is one condition to this gift, my love. Do not tell Michael about this money. I have watched him change over the years, becoming someone who values things over experiences, status, over character. This money is for you, for your dreams, for your security. Michael has his own path to walk now, and part of that journey must be learning that true wealth is not measured in dollars. I love you, Ruth. I always have from the moment you smiled at me in the emergency room. Live beautifully. Live fully. I will be watching and cheering you on." I sat in stunned silence, rereading portions of the letter, trying to process the magnitude of Frank's gift. When I finally accessed the account information through my phone's banking app, I was astonished to discover that Frank's modest, consistent savings over decades had grown to just over $120,000. It was more money than we had ever had at one time in our entire marriage. A gentle tap on the window brought me back to the present. Tom stood there, his expression concerned. I rolled down the window, quickly wiping my tears. "Are you okay?" he asked kindly. "I did not want to interrupt, but you have been in there for quite a while." "I am better than okay," I assured him, carefully folding the letter. "My husband left me an incredible gift, one I never expected." Tom smiled warmly. "I am glad. Listen, Ruth, about the car," he began, his expression turning serious. "I cannot in good conscience keep it knowing how it came into my possession. The sale was not legitimate if your son was not authorized to sell it." "But you paid for it?" I protested weakly, though hope was rising in my chest at the thought of getting the Toyota back. Tom waved away my concern. "Money can be refunded. Some things matter more than money." He held out the keys to me. "This car belongs with you. I can see how much it means to you, and frankly, the story your son told me about an elderly mother who needed to stop driving never sat right with me anyway. You seem perfectly capable to me." I stared at the keys in disbelief. "I do not know what to say. How can I repay you for your kindness?" "No repayment necessary," he insisted, "though I would not say no to hearing more about your husband sometime. He sounds like the kind of man I would have enjoyed knowing." An idea struck me. "Would you and your wife like to come to dinner next weekend? It is the least I can do to thank you both." Tom's face lit up. "We would like that very much. My Jane is a fantastic baker. She will insist on bringing dessert." As we exchanged contact information, I felt a warmth I had not experienced since Frank's passing, the simple human connection of kindness freely given and gratefully received. When Tom called his wife to explain the situation and arrange for her to pick him up, I overheard her immediate and enthusiastic agreement without a moment's hesitation about returning the car. Before Jane arrived, Tom insisted on checking the Toyota's fluid levels and tire pressure, the same routine maintenance Frank had performed religiously. "Just want to make sure she is in good shape for you," he explained, his hands moving with the confidence of someone familiar with older vehicles. When he finished, he handed me the keys with a smile. "She is all yours again, Ruth. Take good care of each other." As I watched him leave with his wife waving from my driveway, I felt a weight lifting. The Toyota was back where it belonged, Frank's letter was safely in my possession, and somehow, in the midst of loss, I had found unexpected friendship and kindness from strangers who quickly felt like friends. That evening, I drove the Toyota to our special spot at Alum Creek Lake, Frank's letter tucked safely in my purse. As the sun set over the water, casting golden reflections across the surface, I felt Frank's presence more strongly than I had since his passing. "Thank you," I whispered to the empty seat beside me, "for everything, for your love, for your foresight, for this final gift." And somewhere deep in my heart, I could almost hear his gentle laugh and his voice saying, "I told you that Toyota was special, Ruth. Some things are worth holding on to." Frank's letter changed everything. After the initial shock wore off, I spent several days carefully considering what to do with this unexpected financial security. The amount was not enough to live luxuriously for the rest of my life, but it provided options I had never thought possible on my receptionist's salary and reduced widow's pension. My first act was to meet with a financial advisor recommended by Tom Peterson, who happened to have a background in retirement planning. She helped me establish a clear picture of my financial situation and create a sustainable plan that would allow me to both secure my future and fulfill some of the dreams Frank had mentioned in his letter. "Your husband was very smart," she commented, reviewing the growth of the account over the decades. "Consistent small investments over time with proper management can create significant results. This gives you breathing room to make choices based on what you want, not just what you can afford." Following her advice, I decided to take a 3-month leave of absence from the hospital. For the first time in 30 years, I would have extended time to process my grief, consider my future, and engage with life beyond work and basic survival. The timing was perfect. as summer was approaching and I had accumulated substantial vacation time that would cover a portion of the leave. True to his instructions, I did not tell Michael about the money. Our relationship remained strained after the car incident, though he had been forced to acknowledge his mistake when Tom contacted him about the fraudulent sale. His apology was perfunctory at best, focused more on his embarrassment than on the violation of my trust or the emotional impact of his actions. "I still think you would be better off without that old car," he said during a brief, uncomfortable visit after everything had been resolved. "But I should have discussed it with you first." I simply nodded, no longer feeling the need to convince him of the Toyota's value or to seek his approval for my choices. Frank's letter had not just provided financial security, but had also given me permission to trust my own judgment to live according to my own values rather than Michael's materialistic standards. With newfound freedom, I began exploring interests long set aside due to work demands and financial constraints. The community college offered a beginner's photography class that met twice weekly, teaching the fundamentals of composition lighting and digital editing. I enrolled immediately, purchasing a modestly priced digital camera that the instructor recommended for novices. The class became the highlight of my week, introducing me to a diverse group of fellow students ranging from teenagers to retirees. We bonded over shared assignments and constructive critiques, forming a small community united by our interest in capturing the world through new eyes. My first successful photo, a close-up of raindrops on one of Frank's beloved tomato plants, earned praise from both the instructor and my classmates. "You have a natural eye for detail," the instructor commented, "for finding beauty in the ordinary." I thought of Frank's words in his journal about how I had always made beauty from whatever life gave you, and felt a deep connection to him through this new pursuit. As my confidence grew, I began planning the trips Frank and I had always talked about but never managed to take. The Grand Canyon would be my first major journey, a solo adventure that both terrified and exhilarated me. I purchased guidebooks, researched accommodations, and plotted a route that would allow me to drive the Toyota at a leisurely pace, stopping at interesting locations along the way. The Toyota received a thorough checkup from Frank's friend Robert before my planned trip. "Frank would be so proud of you," he said as he changed the oil and replaced the air filter. "Taking off on an adventure like this. He always said you were braver than you knew." Tom and Jane Peterson became regular fixtures in my expanding social circle. Our thank you dinner evolved into a monthly gathering alternating between our homes, where we discovered shared interests in gardening, classic films, and local history. They introduced me to their friends, and gradually my weekends filled with invitations and activities that eased the loneliness that had defined the early months after Frank's death. An unexpected healing began with my grandchildren as well. Emboldened by my new independence, I invited Emma and Jacob for a grandma weekend, while Michael and Stephanie attended a charity gala. To my surprise, they agreed, perhaps seeing an opportunity for free childcare rather than a chance for family bonding. Those 2 days with my grandchildren revealed how little they knew about their heritage, their grandfather, or even simple pleasures not mediated through expensive electronics. I taught them to make Frank's famous pancakes, took them fishing at Alum Creek Lake using his old gear, and showed them how to plant tomato seedlings in the backyard garden. "Dad never lets us get dirty," Jacob confided as we dug in the soft earth together. "He says getting messy is for people who cannot afford proper activities." The comment broke my heart but strengthened my resolve to give them experiences that money could not buy. By Sunday evening, when Michael came to collect them, they were proudly showing off the photos they had taken with my camera, the cookies they had learned to bake, and the small potted tomato plants they were taking home. "I want to come back next weekend," Emma declared, clinging to my hand as Michael impatiently checked his watch. "We will see," Michael replied in the non-committal way parents do when they have no intention of following through. But something in his expression had shifted as he observed his children's enthusiasm. Perhaps he recognized what they had gained in just 2 days with me, or perhaps he simply calculated that free weekend childcare had its advantages. Whatever his reasoning, the grandchildren began visiting regularly, sometimes with Michael, dropping them off, sometimes with me picking them up in the Toyota they had come to associate with adventures and freedom. Through them, a tentative rebuilding began between Michael and me, not based on his controlling my life, but on shared love for these children who represented our family's future. The weeks flew by, filled with photography classes, planning my Grand Canyon trip, entertaining my grandchildren, and enjoying new friendships. I found myself smiling more, laughing occasionally, and feeling Frank's presence not as a painful absence, but as a loving guide encouraging my growth. The Toyota remained my faithful companion, carrying me to each new experience with the reliability Frank had always praised. One evening, as I sat in our special spot by the lake reviewing my travel itinerary on a new tablet I had purchased to document my journey, my phone rang with Michael's number. Typically, his calls were brief and practical, often related to scheduling the children's visits. This time, however, his voice held an unfamiliar hesitancy. "Mom," he began awkwardly, "I was wondering if you might have time for coffee tomorrow. Just you and me." Surprised, but cautiously hopeful, I agreed to meet him at a cafe midway between our homes. When I arrived the next day, I found him already seated 2 cups of coffee on the table, including one fixed exactly how I preferred it, a small detail he had not bothered with in years. "You look different," he said after I sat down. "More like yourself somehow." "I feel more like myself," I acknowledged, sipping the perfectly prepared coffee. "These past months have been challenging, but also clarifying." Michael nodded, uncharacteristically reflective. "The kids cannot stop talking about their weekends with you. Jacob actually asked me why we never did the things you do with them, like fishing or making things from scratch." "They are wonderful children," I said simply. "I enjoy spending time with them." "That is just it." Michael continued fidgeting with his napkin. "They are experiencing something with you that Stephanie and I have not been giving them. Something I had as a kid, but somehow forgot about along the way." The admission stunned me with its self-awareness, so unlike the son who had sold my car without permission just months ago. "What made you think about this?" I asked carefully. Michael sighed deeply. "Honestly, watching you change. After Dad died, I expected you to fall apart, to need me to take over and fix everything. Instead, you have become more independent, more vibrant even. The kids see it too. Emma asked me why Grandma seems happier than we do when we have so much more stuff." The observation, coming from a child's unfiltered perspective, seemed to have penetrated Michael's carefully constructed worldview in a way my words never could have. For the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of the thoughtful boy Frank and I had raised, capable of reflection and growth. "I owe you a real apology," he continued, meeting my eyes directly. "Not just for the car, but for how I have treated you, how I have limited your relationship with the kids, how I dismissed what you and Dad valued. I got so caught up in appearances and status that I lost sight of what actually matters." Though tempted to press the advantage of this rare, vulnerable moment, I simply reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to me." We talked for nearly 2 hours longer than any conversation we had shared in years. Michael asked about my photography class and seemed genuinely interested in my planned Grand Canyon trip, though he could not resist suggesting luxury accommodations to replace the modest motels on my itinerary. When I gently declined explaining, I wanted the authentic experience Frank and I had always envisioned, he actually laughed. "You are stubborn, Mom. Dad always said that was his favorite thing about you." He was right, I agreed with a smile, "and he would be proud of you for this conversation today. Growth takes courage." As we parted in the parking lot, Michael hesitated beside the Toyota. "I really am sorry about trying to sell it. I did not understand what it meant to you." "The car itself matters," I acknowledged, patting the familiar hood. "But what matters more is recognizing that value is not always measured in dollars. Your father understood that better than anyone I have ever known." Something in my words seemed to resonate with him. With an impulsive gesture rarely seen in his carefully controlled demeanor, Michael hugged me briefly. "Drive safely, Mom, and send pictures from your trip. The kids would love to follow your adventure." That evening, I drove once more to the lake Frank's letter in the glove box where it belonged. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that my new photographer's eye appreciated with fresh awareness, I felt a sense of completion and new beginning simultaneously. "You were right about everything, Frank," I said aloud to the empty passenger seat. "About the money, about Michael needing to find his own way, about me being stronger than I knew." I touched the steering wheel of the Toyota that had carried us through 4 decades of life together. "And you were especially right about this car. It really does have more character and reliability than most people. The setting sun caught the wedding band I still wore, sending a brief flash of light across the dashboard. In that moment, I felt Frank's presence so strongly it took my breath away, not as a ghost or supernatural visitation, but as the enduring impact of a life well lived and love well given. The next morning, I began packing for my Grand Canyon journey, carefully storing Frank's letter in the glovebox compartment where he had left it for me. It seemed the proper place for it, a reminder that sometimes the most valuable treasures are hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to discover them when we need them most. Have you ever discovered something unexpected that changed your perspective on life after losing someone you love? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember, sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unlikely packages, like an old Toyota with a secret compartment. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button, subscribe to hear more of my journey, and share with someone who might need a reminder that it is never too late to begin a new chapter. Thank you for listening, and may you find unexpected treasures in your own life journey.